Have you ever wondered what truly scares a narcissist? Most people think it's confrontation, arguments, calling them out, maybe even exacting revenge. But the truth is way more interesting and, honestly, a bit surprising. Today, we're diving deep into the psychology behind narcissists and empaths, inspired by the legendary Carl Jung and his observations that still ring true today. Picture this: Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst who basically changed the way we think about the mind, once said that the most powerful weapon against a narcissist isn't anger. It isn't shouting or even exposing them. It's actually the empath, the deeply feeling, intuitively perceptive person, who finally decides they've had enough. And when that happens, it doesn't just shake up the relationship, it actually leaves the narcissist totally powerless. Even Jung himself was shocked by the effect. So, what's really going on here? Why is the dynamic between narcissists and empaths so intense? And why does it matter who wakes up first? According to Jung, there's this whole unseen psychological battle happening, a dance that most people are completely unaware of, but so many go through in their own lives. Let's break it down. Narcissists don't actually fear people who fight back with anger. In fact, they kind of thrive on drama and confrontation. What really terrifies them is someone who sees the truth, someone who wakes up to the reality of what's really happening. For the narcissist, that's the ultimate nightmare. And it all starts with a shift in the empath's mind, a shift that suddenly makes all the narcissist's usual tactics totally useless. Now, if you're someone who identifies as an empath, you'll know exactly what I mean. Empaths have this almost superhuman ability to pick up on feelings, even the things people don't say out loud. They sense the emotional undercurrents in a room, the subtle changes in someone's energy, the things left unsaid. This is a gift, but it also makes empaths vulnerable, especially to people who know how to manipulate emotions for their own gain. Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what happens when that reaction is toxic? What if one personality is there to connect, and the other is just there to consume? Jung spent a lot of time thinking about this, and he identified the exact moment when a narcissist realizes they've lost control. And here's the twist: it usually happens before the empath even fully understands what's going on. At the beginning, it looks like a perfect match. The narcissist is hungry for admiration and attention, and the empath wants to heal, to understand, to help. On the surface, it seems like a balanced partnership, but underneath, it's anything but. See, the narcissist isn't really offering a genuine connection. What they offer is a performance, a persona they put on to get what they want. It's like they're wearing a mask, not to hide who they are, but because the mask is all they have. There's no real person underneath, just the act. And here's where empaths get trapped. According to Jung, it's not naivety that keeps empaths stuck in toxic relationships, it's belief. The belief that if they just love harder, understand deeper, or forgive more, they'll finally break through. They'll finally reach the real person underneath. But Jung's big insight was that for narcissists, the mask isn't hiding anything. The mask is them. So what happens next? The cracks start to show. Little inconsistencies pop up, a lie that doesn't make sense, a moment where empathy is totally absent when you'd expect it most. These things pile up, and eventually, the empath starts to question everything. Maybe for the first time, they wonder, is this really love, or is it just control? Jung had this powerful phrase: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For the empath, the awakening begins when they finally see the relationship for what it is. And yes, it's a shattering realization. But it's also the start of freedom. Jung described this transformation in 3 phases, and it's the third one that really scares narcissists, because it's something they can't manipulate, no matter how hard they try. The first phase is emotional detachment. And let me be clear, this isn't just about feeling numb or indifferent. It's a deep, internal change where the empath stops playing their assigned role in the narcissist's world. It's not just about breaking up or going no contact. It's about breaking those old habits of self-sacrifice, of always putting the narcissist first, of measuring your own worth by how well you meet their needs. Here's what's wild. Narcissists don't just manipulate your emotions, they shape your identity. They create an environment where you're always questioning yourself. Am I doing enough? Am I being too sensitive? Why do I feel guilty for needing space? Jung called this shadow work, facing the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, especially the things that keep you trapped. And what keeps empaths trapped isn't love. It's the belief that their role is to fix, to forgive, to keep trying no matter what. Narcissists exploit that again and again, because it works. But the first sign of real liberation is when the empath starts asking different questions. Why am I always apologizing for their bad behavior? Why do I feel like I have to earn basic respect? That's when things start to shift. Jung realized that silence can actually become a weapon, but not in a vengeful way. When an awakened empath stops explaining, stops justifying, stops reacting, the narcissist gets rattled. It's not what the empath says, it's what they stop saying. And that brings us to the second phase, the power of non-reaction. Narcissists need someone to engage with, to provoke, to manipulate, because that's how they regulate their own shaky sense of self. When the empath refuses to play along, not out of spite, but out of clarity, the narcissist starts to lose their grip. The silence isn't passive, it's an act of rebellion. It says, "You don't have access to me anymore." At this point, the narcissist usually gets desperate. They might try to charm, guilt, threaten, or suddenly act vulnerable, anything to rope the empath back in. But if the empath stands firm, they discover something profound. Closure doesn't come from the narcissist. It comes from no longer needing anything from them at all. So, what happens when the narcissist realizes their old tricks no longer work? According to Jung, there's a very specific moment when the narcissist finally gets it. They've lost control for good. And it all comes down to something the empath does next, something the narcissist never saw coming. This is the third and most powerful transformation. The empath finds their authentic voice. Now, this isn't the frantic, defensive voice that spent years explaining, justifying, or trying to keep the peace. This is a whole new voice, one that comes from deep clarity instead of fear. It's honest, direct, and doesn't ask for permission or approval. And here's the real magic, when the empath finally names things as they are, saying, "This was manipulation," or "This wasn't love," they're rewriting their story. They're no longer living in the narrative the narcissist forced on them. Jung talked a lot about the power of naming. In psychology, naming something is a way of defining it, giving it structure and meaning. When empaths start calling out manipulation for what it is, they're not just setting boundaries, they're reclaiming their identity. They're saying, "I decide what's real for me now." And that is a game changer. But the story doesn't end there. Jung noticed something fascinating. When an empath not only survives narcissistic abuse but actually starts to thrive, it creates a kind of existential crisis for the narcissist. Why? Because thriving proves something the narcissist has always tried to deny, that they were never the source of the empath's light. In fact, they were just blocking it. See, narcissists crave significance more than anything else. They want to be the main character in someone else's life story. But when the empath recovers and flourishes, the narcissist is forced to face the truth. They're no longer relevant. For someone whose whole identity is built on control and attention, that's devastating. Jung described this as psychological annihilation. The narcissist's worst fear isn't just being left, it's being rendered irrelevant. When the empath moves on, builds a happy life, and stops thinking about them, the narcissist's whole self-image starts to collapse. Now, here's the really important part for anyone healing from this kind of dynamic. Jung identified something he called individualization. This is the ultimate psychological boundary, the moment when someone becomes fully themselves. For empaths, individuation means developing boundaries not out of anger or resentment, but out of genuine self-respect. These boundaries aren't just walls to keep people out, They're frameworks for building a healthier, more authentic life. Think of boundaries as the architecture of your freedom. They're not just about saying no to others, they're about saying yes to yourself. When you maintain boundaries, you're inviting growth, connection, and real love into your life, instead of exhaustion and drama. And here's something Jung found really profound. The most terrifying thing for a lot of people, especially those who've gone through narcissistic abuse, is learning to accept themselves completely. For empaths, this is a radical shift. It means recognizing your worth as something that isn't dependent on how much you do for others. It's understanding that self-care isn't selfish. It's necessary for true empathy and real relationships. If you've ever felt guilty for setting boundaries, or worried that saying no means you're a bad person, Jung would say, that's exactly what you need to challenge. Self-acceptance is key. It's not just about protecting yourself from narcissists. It's about growing into a version of yourself that's whole, strong, and impossible to manipulate. Jung believed that once you go through this transformation, your psychological power doesn't just affect your relationship with the narcissist, it changes everything. You start seeing all your relationships differently. You become more attuned to what's healthy and what's not. You instinctively move away from people who drain you, and you gravitate toward those who respect and uplift you. It's like you've upgraded your inner radar. You can sense manipulation or control from a mile away, and you don't fall for it anymore. You don't need to prove yourself, explain yourself, or try to heal people who don't want to be healed. You just live your truth, and for narcissists, that's the ultimate defeat. The game is over, not because you destroyed them, but because you rebuilt yourself. You embody what Jung called wholeness. You've integrated your shadow, the parts of yourself you used to hide or deny, and you live from a place of strength, not woundedness. This is where real freedom begins. Your boundaries become the foundation of your sanctuary, not a fortress built out of fear, but a home where you can finally rest, grow, and invite in real connection. And that's the message Jung would want us all to hear. Your healing isn't just about surviving someone else's abuse. It's about reclaiming your life, your voice, and your happiness. So if you've found yourself stuck in this dance with a narcissist, or if you're on the journey of waking up to your own power as an empath, remember, everything changes when you turn inward, do the shadow work, and set boundaries from a place of self-respect. The freedom you're looking for is already inside you. It just needs permission to grow. So, what does life actually look like after you've done it through all these internships? What happens when an empath not only survives a narcissist's manipulation, but truly thrives? Jung would say, this is where the story gets really inspiring, and honestly, it's the part that every survivor needs to hear. First, let's talk about what thriving really means. It's not just about getting away from toxic people or cutting ties with the narcissist. It's about growing because of what you've been through. It's about becoming a more integrated, more self-aware, and more resilient person. You start to see your past not as something that broke you, but as the catalyst for your transformation. For empaths, this is huge. The old pattern was to give too much, to lose yourself in someone else's needs, to believe your worth was tied to how much you could heal or fix another person. But after doing the work, facing your shadow, setting boundaries, finding your authentic voice, you realize your value isn't up for negotiation. It's not defined by anyone else's approval or validation. And here's the kicker. When you start living from that place of wholeness, narcissists can't touch you. Their tactics bounce right off, because you're not seeking anything from them anymore. You don't need their praise, their attention, or even their closure. You're living for yourself now, and that's a superpower. Jung believed that this process, what he called individuation, is the true goal of psychological growth. It's about becoming your own person, no longer trapped by old wounds or other people's stories about who you should be. You don't have to fight for your place in someone's life. You simply are, and you're enough. The most beautiful part. When you reach this place, your boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about inviting the right people in. You attract relationships that are built on mutual respect, honesty, and shared growth. You're no longer drained by drama or manipulation. Instead, you're energized by authentic connections, and this is the point where the narcissist loses all power. They crave significance. They want to be the star of your story. But when you've rebuilt yourself, when you're thriving and happy on your own terms, they become irrelevant to your journey. That's the outcome they can't stand, because it proves the one thing they fear most. They were never the source of your light. They were just standing in its way. Now, let's get practical for a minute. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in these patterns, what can you do? How do you start this process of transformation? First, notice the patterns. Pay attention to the ways you might be overgiving, apologizing for things that aren't your fault, or feeling guilty for needing space. These are usually signs that you're stuck in an old narrative. Second, start small with boundaries. You don't have to make a dramatic announcement or cut everyone off. Begin by saying no to things that drain you and yes to things that nurture you. Remember, every healthy boundary is an act of self-respect. Third, do the shadow work. This means looking honestly at the parts of yourself you've avoided, the fears, the insecurities, the reasons you stayed in unhealthy dynamics. It's tough work, but it's where real healing happens. And finally, find your authentic voice. Speak your truth, even if it shakes at first. You don't owe anyone endless explanations or justifications. The more you practice this, the stronger and clearer your voice becomes. Jung's message, at the end of the day, is one of hope and empowerment. You can turn the pain of narcissistic abuse into the foundation of your own growth. You don't have to stay stuck in the old dance. The most dangerous person to a narcissist isn't someone who fights dirty or retaliates. It's someone who has reclaimed their story, integrated their shadow, and now lives from a place of wholeness. If that's you, or if you're on your way there, know that your journey is not just about survival. It's about transformation. It's about building a life where your boundaries aren't barriers, but bridges to deeper connection and real joy. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's remember, your boundaries are the architecture of your freedom. Build them with intention. Maintain them with self-love. And watch as your life transforms from a battleground into a sanctuary. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you find value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. Your journey matters, and so does your healing. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you are more powerful than you think.